In my talk, I examine how Kenny Freese constructs an intersectional self dealing with his Jewish cultural background, homosexuality, and disability in his memoirs Body Remember and in The Province of the Gods, published in 1997 and 2017. These life narratives take a special focus on the body and offer a complex interrogation of the interdependence of body, mind, and self other. As they create an imaginary space across national borders, I consider them transnational texts that particularly investigate the relation of the gendered and disabled body to national ideology and belonging. I will argue that they contest the nation through discursive ways of decentering the national and the autobiographical subject. Both memoirs have been published in the University of Wisconsin Press series Living Out Gay and Lesbian Autobiographies that describes autobiography as a crucial gay genre. What the combination of the terms gay, lesbian, and autobiography implies is that the genre is transparent in its expression of individual lives, thereby concealing its ideological and historical embeddedness. Indeed, I will partially contradict the thesis that autobiography is a crucial gay genre by arguing that the genre has been serving as national master narrative. While autobiographical texts reclaim individual lives, this individuality simultaneously and paradoxically reproduces national ideology because both the genre and the nation rely on a post Enlightenment conception of subjectivity. According to Stuart Hall, it is now a commonplace that the modern age gave rise to a new and decisive form of individualism. Social transformations between the Renaissance humanism of the 16th century and the Enlightenment of the 18th century freed the individual from its stable place in traditions and structures, which resulted in the concept of the sovereign individual. Rene Descartes set the foundation for these reflections on the subject by formulating a dualism between mind and matter that determines the commonsensical understanding of ourselves still today. His formula, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, created a rational individual centered on the mind, while it dismissed the body as unimportant. The Cartesian subject has been described as unique, unitary, unencumbered by all forms of embodiment, and it became the origin of reason, knowledge, and practice. As Sidney Smith points out, traditional autobiography has been implicated in a specific notion of selfhood, the Enlightenment self. While both autobiographical writing and autobiography criticism have been shaped by the uniqueness and coherence of the modern subject conception, the nation appears to be constructed along similar lines. In his seminal work, Imagined Communities, Benedict Anderson argues that the nation has been imagined as sovereign, limited, and coherent community. While Anderson does not explicitly mention the nation's relation to the modern concept of individuality, Raymond Williams gives something of an explanation in his monograph Keywords. It was not until the late 17th and 18th centuries that a new mode of analysis in logic and mathematics postulated the individual as the substantial entity, from which other categories and especially collective categories were derived. The political thought of the Enlightenment mainly followed this model. Argument began from individuals who had an initial and primary existence, and laws and forms of society were derived from them by submission, as in Hobbes, for example. Underlying the concept of the nation, the classical social contract theories argue that individuals agree to giving up freedom in order to gain protection through the legitimized ruler. In concluding the contract, the state of nature dissolves and a civil society emerges. The frontispiece of Hobbes' Leviathan, published in 1651 by Abraham Boss, vividly illustrates how the nation may be seen as a derivation from the individual. The sovereign ruler's body is made of each individual citizen, and thereby the meaning of individuality seems to be transferred to the collectivity. To conclude, the nation can not only be defined as imagined, according to Anderson, but also as individualized. Kenny Freese's transnational memoirs position themselves within national discourse and construct a nationally marginalized self. Embodied Remember, Kenny's scars, the traces of childhood operations to correct his deformed legs, function as the signs that embody the autobiographical subject. They echo throughout the narrative and are triggering devices that stimulate certain memories. When Kenny touches his scars, or when they are touched by someone else, he remembers. Lying back in the tub, I feel Jason's fingers slide up the scar on the side of my right leg. He touches the holes where the pins were inserted after surgery close to 20 years ago. Soon I'm telling him the names my brother used to call me when I was young. While these bodily acts of remembering are emphasized in the narrative, more conceptual efforts of recalling the past are presented as deficient. Instead, I close my eyes and conjure my father's hands on my scars. But no matter how hard I try, the sensation of my father's caressing hands cannot be called from memory. What the narrative suggests at several points is the interdependence of body and mind, paying testimony to neurological insights that define memory as a bodily process and also have effective autobiography criticism. Based on neurobiologist Gerald Edelman, Eakin argues that the brain's neural organization is constantly modified to adapt to the ever-changing demands of experience. Because bodily experiences form the brain, the transcendental notion of the Enlightenment self that equates individual and mind, relegating the body to a secondary role, can be dismissed. In Body Remember, the narrator is self-reflexive about the body's role in remembering. Everything I write is necessarily from the perspective of a 35-year-old man who now experiences secondhand what that infant experienced then. I feel what that infant felt through a nervous system years older and by now accustomed to a certain amount of physical and emotional pain. There is no other way of retrieval, no other way to remember. Freese decenters the autobiographical subject by embodying the principal autobiographical practice of remembering. The national subject usually parallels the modern subject conception. It is constructed as male, rational, and disembodied. The narrative illustrates this by showing how a prominent national subject, Franklin D. Roosevelt, is normalized, erasing his disability in the construction of a national monument. Here you see how his disability is concealed. Later, in 2001, after a controversial debate, this statue was added to the memorial. Highlighting Roosevelt's polio and its significance before and during his presidency, the narrative decenters the disembodied national subject by drawing attention back to his body. Freese embodies the process of individual and collective remembering, unsettling the modern notion of disembodied individuality. Although In the Province of the Gods follows a similar scheme, it diverges in the discursive ways of decentering. It rather transcends boundaries between subject, object, and nation, other nations, with its focus on universal vulnerability. In this life narrative, Kenny embarks on a journey to Japan to do research on the representation of disability there. In Tokyo, Kenny is shown a gallery in a small building in the backyard of a cafe. It used to function as a storehouse in the Edo period and survived both the 1923 earthquake and the war bombings, which was the reason why the owners kept it and made it into a gallery. While this passage elicits Japan's vulnerability, the narrator immediately combines it with remembering three short stories around 9/11 that not only express the vulnerability of the self-proclaimed hegemonic power, the United States, but also of the normate's body. The narrator concludes these stories stating, "My disability experience forces to the surface what everyone, Disabled and non-disabled alike prefers to keep tightly wrapped inside. This contingency of survival shared by every human existence is what the narrative evokes at several points. Both memoirs find ways of questioning and subverting hegemonic constructions of subjectivity and nationality. Friese's autobiographical selves are intersectional and embodied. Nevertheless, they are designed in autobiographical discourse with its ideological implications. As Paul de Man argues, life writing is not a simple expression of life, but acquires a degree of representation productivity, which poses the question of how the genre shapes the presented selves. The first chapter of Body Remember is called Questions of Origin, although the text does not close by disclosing final answers, but leaves questions unanswered. The narrative is partially structured as a worthwhile quest of finding the subject's origin. This quest conveys the meaning of searching for the subject's singularity, his originality, in the sense that there is something rare and unique about this individual. The most profound contradiction, however, occurs in the depiction of the process of remembering. I've argued that the memoir works to embody the autobiographical subject, to show how the body plays an important role in remembering. On the plot level, conceptual remembering and introspection are shown to be flawed. However, the process of life writing is indeed a conceptual process, and to suggest that on the plot level it does not work is to remain silent about the mode of production. Even though these contradictions and silences diminish the effect of the memoir's contestations of hegemonic ideas of subjectivity, the texts construct intersectional selves and contest national ideology by embodying the autobiographical and national subject. These are my sources, and thank you very much for your attention.